Yeah. So the topic that we're bringing in under discussion today is the new media as challenges to existing power structures. I just write down the topic over here. The topic we're discussing today is the new media. I'll just pick up another color. The new media as challenges to existing power structures. Now, about new media, I hope when we had covered I hope when we had covered the introductory part to this particular topic yesterday, you did understand what this was. And in our today's lesson, our focus would be on the extent to which new media is capable, the new media that is internet related media, that is social media websites, that is different applications, different platforms from Facebook to Instagram to Twitter to Snapchat to podcasting and whatnot. So, the extent to which the new media is or could be a challenge to the power structures within a society, the extent to which the new media is powerful enough to be able to challenge to the existing power structures within a particular society. Now, having said that, if we talk about this particular topic, we have had a question on this in October, November 2021. And this question that we had in October, November 2021, this says, access to the new media has given people more power to challenge existing power structures. I repeat, access to the new media has given people more power to challenge existing power structures. We're talking about the extent we're talking about the extent the new media is considered to be powerful enough to be able to challenge existing power structures. Now, if I talk about this particular topic and if I talk about this question that we've had in the CIs, you'd see that this question looks like this has been specifically made from this particular topic. Now, when we speak about power structures over here, we're talking about existing governments, we're talking about governing bodies, we're talking about politicians, we're talking about the state. So, to what extent the new media is powerful enough to challenge the state, to be able to challenge the power structures within a society? Now, what are the key focus of this question? If we talk about the key focus over here, I'm just reading through the marking scheme so that you all understand what all is it that the CIE expects from us. And based on what the CIE expects on us, we'd try to cover this topic so that when we're done with this particular topic, you exactly know what to write when you're answering this particular question. Having said that, let me just read this out. The new media are seen as more interactive than the traditional media, giving individual citizens more opportunity to shape media content, network with a wide base of like-minded people, and organize protests and or resistance to government actions with which they disagree. Now, this particular part we are referring to citizen journalism over here. The word I'm using is citizen journalism, the idea that a common man, an ordinary man, feels empowered enough to raise his or her concern, to raise his or her voice about something, about a particular social issue that they think is that they think is important to be important and significant enough to be looked into by the government. So, what is the expectation that the CI has from us? Good answers to the question will consider how far people have been empowered. So, the extent to which people have been empowered is something that your answer should involve, or your answer should have, by the challenging existing sorry how far people have been empowered by the emergence of the new media, and whether claims about greater power to challenge existing power structures can be substantiated. So yes, to quite an extent, we all would agree that the emergence and the extent to which the new media has gained popularity today has led to like minded people being put together, and that has given them an opportunity to raise their concerns as well. But another concern that cannot be ignored over here is are they powerful enough to be able to bring in a change? If they're just protesting and there's no change, then is it worthwhile is a question. So claims about greater power to challenge existing power structures can be substantiated. The extent to which these power structures being challenged can be substantiated should be or could be a part of some good answers. Debates between digital optimists, we talk about digital optimists over here, and we talk about digital pessimists. They may feature in well informed responses. Digital optimists argue that, I'll just highlight this part as well. Digital optimists argue that activists have used the internet and social media to challenge power elites in a number of ways, including harnessing mass support for political campaigns, number one. Number two, raising awareness of government malpractice and maladministration, and coordinating protests and activism. So, number one, harnessing mass support for political campaigns. Number two, raising awareness of government malpractice and maladministration. And number three, coordinating protests and activism. Now, this is when we talk about digital optimists. If we have a look and if we speak about digital pessimists over here, they argue that political protests organized through the new media have had relatively little success in achieving the aims of the activists. Authoritarian governments, being more specific, in particular have been ruthless in cracking down on internet use whenever opponents have any success in using the new media to advance their cause. So you could bring in authoritarian governments over here and you could use some contemporary examples as well. Taking this ahead, examples of particular political campaigns may be used. Now, these examples that we're referring to, they cater to the AO2 assessment objective. AO2 assessment objective. Now, this is AO2. AO2 refers to interpretation and application, the extent to which whatever you studying in sociology can be applied to the real world. However, when I talk about digital optimism and digital pessimism, I'd like to drag this under the category of AO1, that is assessment objective one, and AO1 over here refers to knowledge and understanding. However, if we talk about this part, how far have people been empowered? This requires evaluation. This requires an analysis. If we talk about the extent to which the extent to which new media has been able to challenge existing power structures, or have these protests actually led to bringing in a change, or how successful have these protests been, all of this would help us cater to AO3. And AO3 over here is analysis and evaluation. So for if you talk about our a marking mechanism, if you talk about the CAI marking mechanism for AO1, that is knowledge and understanding, we get 9 marks. For AO2, that is interpretation and application, we get 11 marks. And we get 15 marks for AO3, that is our evaluation and analysis. So examples of particular political campaigns, I just highlight this part too. Particular political campaigns may be used in good answers as a way of debating the issue to which digital optimists and digital pessimists have drawn attention. So, if we talk about indicative content over here, let me remind you this very clearly says indicative content. And when we use the word indicative content, we're talking about these points that we have written in front of us, them being an option of being used. The CI does not at all restrict you to these points. So if there's any point beyond these, you can of course write it in your answer. If there's any point that you do not want to use from the points that you have in front of you, that is again totally on your discretion too. So the new media allows political activists. We're talking about the arguments in support of the idea that the new media is powerful enough to be able to challenge power structures, or to be able to challenge the state, or to be able to challenge the government, or to be able to challenge the elite or the powerful people within a particular society. So the first point here, the new media allow political activists to carry out the same activities as in the past, but they're able to do so more quickly. So they're able to do so more quickly on a larger scale and at a lower cost. Now, over here we're referring to we referring to how Jennifer Earle and Katrina Kemport in the year 2011, they argue that digital technology has had two main effects on activism. So the two main effects, Earle and Kemport in the year 2011 claim that digital technology has had as an effect on activism. They refer to this as the qualitative change and the quantitative change. When I talk about quantitative change over here, we're referring to the scale change, the scale of change, or scale of change. In other words, the extent to which, when I use the word scale, I'm talking about this part. How large have they become, or the extent to which people now have an opportunity to gather more of people more quickly and with very little cost being incurred. However, on the other hand, when we talk about the second main effect, that is qualitative change, that is the change in terms of model, which we talk about in a bit. So having said that, if we move on, the first point over here read, the new media allow political activists to carry out the same activities as in the past, but more quickly, on a larger scale, and at lower cost. Taking it ahead, the second point, the new media allow people to organize themselves without formalized bureaucracies and central leaders. So the possibility of being able to organize protests without formalized bureaucracies and central leaders. We're talking about decentralization. We're talking about decentralization. We're talking about people being able to gather, people being, we were talking about people gathering together, people being together for a particular cause, even when they do not have any formal leadership. So protest groups emerge in a more spontaneous fashion and can quickly generate sufficient support to catch political opponents off guard. So we're talking about there being a change in the model. Remember a couple of minutes ago when I had spoken about how Earl and Kimport in the year 2011, they argue that digital technology has had two main effects on activism. The first I had spoken about was a scale change, which I just write this down over here so that there's a bit more clarity. So we're talking about a scale change over here. And when I use the word scale change over here, we're talking about a quantitative change. Quantitative change, right? However, on the other hand, if I use the word qualitative change over here, I'm talking about a change in the model. Now, this particular point is explaining us how there's been a difference in terms of the model, how there's been a difference in terms of the model. And I'd like to refer to this as a model change. Not only that, I'd also want to refer to this as a qualitative change. So these points that we're talking about, they were put forward by Earl and Kimport in the year 2011. Now, taking this ahead, as in the case of Arab Spring's anti-government movements, this is again an example that helps us understand AO2, which spread across the Middle East and North Africa between 2010 and 2012. So this again is the example part that the examiner was referring to, and this caters to AO2, that is interpretation and application. This is what we're talking about, the particular political campaigns. These are the examples that the CAI was referring to. Now, taking this a little further from here, the next point, the new media can be used to monitor the illegal or immoral activities. So being able to, or having the opportunity to be able to monitor the illegal or immoral activities of big businesses and governments. Again, we have an example over here. We have an example of hacktivist movements. Now, for just in case if you do not know what hacktivism or hacktivist movements are, as the name suggests, hacktivism has to do with hacking. And we have many examples. For instance, there's this group, you guys can Google this as well, the group with the name Anonymous. And not only Anonymous is the name of a group, okay? Not only Anonymous, but along with Anonymous, there have been other hacktivist groups as well. And they have very successfully been able to infiltrate government and corporate websites, right? So they have been successful in actually hacking many governments' websites and corporate websites, and they have been successful in exposing a lot of hidden data. One such example is the anonymous cyber attack against the Russian government. This was in 2022. You might as well just write this down. I understand this question is from 2021. I understand this question is from 2021, but this example that I'm giving you over here is a recent example. It's a contemporary example, and this, of course, can be put to use because this hacktivist group that is anonymous, this has been operational since a while now. So you can use the example of the cyber attacks against Russian government in 2022, where they were able to leak confidential documents related to Ukraine war. They leaked documents related to the Ukraine war. So this particular point, this third point is what I'm referring to over here. We're talking about the new media being used to be able to monitor the illegal or immoral activities of big businesses or even governments. Now, there are many hacktivist networks, right? Hacktivist is a combination, the word hacktivist is a combination of hacking activists, right? So it's, let's just say, a term that we use for individuals or small groups, for groups that hack, and they use hacking as a mechanism through which they're activists who hack. Let's put it in a simple manner. So there are some hacktivist networks. Amongst them is a hacktivist network with the name Anonymous. This name Anonymous is the name of a hacktivist group. What does this activist group do? As the name suggests, they hack or they infiltrate government and corporate websites, right? So they hack government websites. This example that I've mentioned on the right side of the screen, we're talking about how this hacktivist group that is anonymous, they had their cyber attacks against the Russian government. So we're talking about them being able to infiltrate the Russian government in the year 2022, where they were successful in leaking documents that the Russians had related to the Ukraine war. So we're talking about the power, we're talking about the powerful, we're talking about the power of new media. Now, taking this ahead, the fourth point that we have over here, the digital revolution has enabled citizen journalism. Now, what is citizen journalism? Because more of individuals have access to the internet, because more of individuals today have smartphones. This has led to a revolution in the digital technology, which of course has an impact on different activists, on different activities as well. Now, the digital revolution has enabled citizen journalism, with civilians having access to the technology to send instant messages and pictures around the globe, including to international media outlets, in order to report on events affecting citizen protests and government attempts to repress opposition. So we're talking about a digital revolution over here. Now, what impact or what difference is this digital revolution making? Because of this digital revolution, there's been a lot of citizen journalism. What is citizen journalism over here? The idea that an ordinary individual, the idea that an ordinary citizen is today empowered enough or feels empowered enough because of having access to the technology, and is actually able to send instant messages and pictures across the globe. Which, I mean, if of course you're able to send a picture or an instant message to your cousin who's sitting in the United States of America, you could send the same to an to any international media outlet as well. So you have more of, so there's this path that you have, so you have more of an opportunity to be able to expose your government, to be able to show the world that your government is trying to repress you. So that's just one example that I gave. Now, taking this ahead, if we quickly move on towards the against side of the argument, if we talk about the against side over here, against side, in other words, we're opposing to the idea that the popularity that this new media has today has been helping individuals stand up against the government. So taking this ahead, there is little evidence that the use of the new media has helped protest movements achieve their objectives. For example, so there's little evidence. For example, if you go back to the Arab Spring, only the uprising in Tunisia has resulted in a transition to constitutional democracy. In other countries, authoritarianism still prevails or civil wars continue. So I'll just walk you through this real quick. If we speak about if we speak about the Arab Spring, now what happened was there were different countries from the Middle East who according to our books were governed through authoritative regimes, right? They were governed through authoritarian regimes. Now, as we speak about these countries being governed through authoritarian regimes, of course, we after the advancements in technology, after the popularity that the new media gained, this provided people with an opportunity, like we had spoken about how there's been a change in the scale and how there's been a change in the model. So initially it was, I mean, back in the past, back in the days when we had traditional media, it might not have been very easy for someone, for an activist to be able to gather people. But today, in this day and age, when we have today in this day and age, when we have improved digital technology, when you can almost instantly send messages to bulk of people in just seconds, this provided people with an opportunity to stand up against the government. So when people stood up against the government, I just take you back and show this to you as well. See, this is where we were talking about how from 2010 to 2012, this is the Arab Spring, this is what we're talking about. Okay, so now a question for some of the students might be that how is it that we are talking about the Arab Spring in the for side of the argument and the against side of the argument as well? See, there's no denial to this, that advancements in technology actually helped people protest against the governments in a different and a better manner and on a larger scale. But the question is, did these protests make any difference? Because if these protests did not make any difference, then the eventual outcome, I mean, you did not get what you wanted out of those protests. So in the against side, when we and as we discussed the against side over here, for example, in relation to the Arab Spring, only the uprising in Tunisia has resulted in a transition to constitutional democracy. In other countries, authoritarianism still prevails or civil wars continue. So, for example, if we talk about the Arab Spring, like I said, only Tunisia transitioned to democracy. For instance, if we talk about Egypt, Egypt saw a military coup. If we talk about Libya, Syria, and Yemen, they fell into civil wars. So, if these protests that were facilitated, if these protests that were initiated, I'm not sure if they were initiated only through the new media, but if these protests were definitely facilitated by and through the new media, they helped gather more people. They helped people protest in a different manner. But the end result was it was only Tunisia who changed from an authoritarian regime to a constitutional democracy. There are other countries, like I just mentioned, countries such as Libya, countries such as Syria, countries such as Yemen, they fell into civil wars. Egypt had to go through a military coup. So Moving on to the second point, authoritarian governments increasingly seek to limit liberating potential of the new media by developing censorship, by deploying censorship, mass political control, and technology capture. We're talking about how authoritarian governments, even to this date as we speak, now, even when Pakistan is known as a democratic country, you see how Twitter has been banned. Now, this Twitter being banned, I believe this was back in 2024, if I'm not mistaken. But even to this date, if you try using Twitter, you cannot without using a VPN. So there are governments, they know how to limit the liberating potential of the new media. None of you can forget, I'm sure, as to the recent elections that we had, right? The recent elections that we had. Don't you remember how your government very conveniently cuts your internet? How you're not allowed to use internet? So don't you think it is the government showing its power? Don't you think it's the government showing you that they can limit your usage of the internet? And of course, when you're talking about new media over here, if your internet usage is limited, if your internet usage is restricted, how is it that you're planning on bringing in a change? So the third point, outside the wealthy established democracies, large number of people still lack access to internet and digital technologies. The lack of access to digital technologies. They're therefore reliant on government controlled traditional media. The fourth point, technology providers are under increasing pressure to exercise closure control over how the technology is used. Now, this point, technology providers, ISPs, internet service providers, they're under increasing pressure to exercise closer control over how the technology is used and by whom. For example, if you talk about Facebook, Facebook has recently banned a number of account users who were seen by the company to be posting socially undesirable content. I think your generation understands this point more than I do. While some will see this as responsible monitoring of media usage, others will view it as a potentially troubling development that places restrictions on how individuals use the new media and who is judged suitable to post messages and organize protests. Now, I hope reading through this marking scheme has helped you understand how we can actually helped you understand how we can actually put these points into use. Now, these points that we've just spoken about, I would like to discuss these points with you all, and while we discuss all of these points, you'd exactly understand how to end up writing an answer on this particular question. Now, without any further ado, I quickly want to move on to this topic. Having a look at this topic, the topic. So this is a question that we were discussing, right? Now, taking this ahead, we talk about the new media as challenges, as a challenge to existing power structures. The new media as a challenge to existing power structures. We're all aware how digital optimists have been very vocal about how the new media today has played its role in terms of empowering ordinary citizens, how the new media today has facilitated communication, how the new media today has helped with data sharing, how the new media today has played its role in terms of revitalizing democracy, how this new media today has given an ordinary citizen an opportunity to turn into, to get into, or to be a citizen journalist. Now, who's a citizen journalist? Like I had mentioned a couple of minutes ago, when we use the word citizen journalism, we're talking about the opportunity a common man, a layman has today of doing what a journalist do. See, everyone who has a smartphone can click a picture and report something. So who can join together and take action that may lead to a social change, that might lead to a social change. And over here, the word we're using over here is digital activism. Now, what exactly does the word digital activism over here mean? If we talk about this word, if we use this word digital activism, we're referring to the use of new information and communication technologies, or we're talking about the extent to which digital technology today is used in bringing in changes, is used to bring about social and political changes. Now, how is it that you'd be able to bring in social and political changes? You'd be able to bring in social and political changes through campaigning. How the new media, how digital technology has facilitated campaigning over social and political issues. Now, taking this ahead, if we talk about digital activism, this is what I was talking about. We're talking about this book that is written by Earl and Kimpert in the year 2011. The name of the book is Digitally Enabled Social Change, Activism in the Internet Age. So Earl and Kimpert in the year 2011, they argue that digital technology has had two main effects on activism. So what are these two main changes? One, we could speak about a quantitative change. We could talk about how there's been a scale change, or how there's how people are actually able to protest on a larger scale. And on the other hand, we would speak about digital I'm sorry, on the other hand, we'd speak about a qualitative change. And as I talk about a qualitative change, we're talking about a change in the model. And when I use the word a change in the model, remember a couple of minutes ago where we had spoken about how people are able to protest today without any formalized bureaucracy, without any leadership, without any leadership, or without any formalized bureaucracy. Now, taking this ahead, let's start off with scale changes over here. I'm sorry. In terms of scale change, activists carry out the same activities as in the analog era. I mean, as in the analog era, or over here we're talking about they could actually do the same, or they could actually campaign in the same manner as they did during the days when there was traditional media. But guess what? Because of advancements in technology, because of the advancements that we see every passing day in this new media, this campaigning has changed in the sense that people can today campaign in a quicker manner, on a larger scale, and at a lower cost. Do you see how content from this student book, which we also refer to as the purple book, is used in the marking scheme? I mean, I think that should be a hint for many over here. But I just read this point a couple of minutes ago as well. So, but when we were reading this a couple of minutes ago, it was through the marking scene. Now it is from the book, like as is. So they provide the examples of online petitions, e-petitions. Your generation knows what online petitions are. You know what e-petitions are. They're faster, they're more convenient. They give you an opportunity to get hold of many people in relatively very less amount of time. So e-petitions collect signatures in the same way as paper petitions, but you'd be able to do so at a larger scale because they can be signed by anyone at any time, at a lower cost because they can be started and distributed for free. Now, taking this ahead, this was about the scale change, which we had referred to as quantitative change, right? So I believe this was the second point from the marking scheme. And if we move on and we talk about a model change over here, in terms of model change, Earl and Kimpert contrast, or they compare traditional activism back in the days when we had traditional media, back in the days when we had the television, the radio, the newspapers, books, and magazines, with the new ways that are used today to be able to campaign against power structures, to be able to campaign against governments, to be able to campaign against elite businesses. So, as we speak in terms of model change, Earl and Kimpert contrast traditional activism organized by formal organizations such as trade unions and NGOs with what happened in the Arab Spring. Remember, Arab Spring, we've spoken about this twice in the last 20 minutes. So, in the Arab Spring, what was this? This was an anti government movement which spread across the Middle East and North Africa between 2010 and mid 2012. So, see, we cannot deny that there were no protests. Yes, there were protests. Yes, there were protests. Yes, these protests had more of people involved than they would have been involved if only traditional media was there. Did they bring in a change? Like I said a couple of minutes ago, yes, in Tunisia. But that let's just keep that for now. Let's discuss this when we're discussing the flip side of the coin, when we're discussing an antithesis over here, when we're talking about AO3, when we catering to AO3, that is evaluation and analysis. So taking this ahead, in the Arab Spring anti-government movements, which spread across the Middle East and North Africa between 2010 and mid 2012, and the Occupy movement. Now, for the ones who know, they know about this Occupy movement. I'm sorry about this Occupy movement. You can Google this again as well. The only hint that I'd like to give you over here is Marxism. And if you're an A2 sociology student, you should be aware of what the Marxists predicted, what the Marxists look forward towards. And the Occupy movement, that is, there were demonstrations against corporate greed, social inequality, and the political domination of richest 1%. So there were protests against the greedy richest 1% people, also referred to as the bourgeoisies uh, if you're someone who knows Marxism, which I'd like to assume everyone does, which began in New York and Wall Street in 2011 and subsequently spread to over 900 cities. All of this was only possible because of new media. All of this was only possible because new media or digital technology gives you an opportunity to be able to campaign at a very low cost, to be able to campaign in a very cost effective manner, to be able to campaign without having any centralized leadership, to be able to campaign at a larger scale, to be able to get your message through in a quicker manner. So the new media allow participants to organize themselves without formalized central leaders. Leaders emerge as a result of individuals choosing to follow certain people, for example, on Twitter. So the one who has more followers, that's it. Now, taking this ahead, moving on, we're talking about the word we're using over here is digital optimism, or we're talking about digital optimists. Now, taking this ahead, if we speak about, and as we speak about digital activists over here, digital optimists argue that digital activists have used the internet to challenge power elites in a number of ways. I repeat, digital optimists argue that digital activists have used the internet to challenge power elites in a number of ways. So these are the different ways. I mean, there are ample and ample of them, but amongst them, we could discuss a few of them right here. We're talking about how digital optimists believe that digital activists have actually used digital technology. They've actually used the internet, they've actually used the new media to be able to challenge powerful elites, to be able to challenge the bourgeoisies. One, it has been used to monitor the illegal or immoral activities of big businesses. Number one. Number two, it has been used to harness mass support for causes such as Make Poverty History. Now, for the ones who do not know about this campaign, Make Poverty History, this was a UK alliance of charities, trade unions, campaigning groups, and celebrities who started mobilizing around the G8 summit in the United Kingdom in 2005 to fight against global injustices such as poverty. So this is again an example. You don't have to know this. Just in case, if you've prepared for this, this is something that has helped you that would help you get marks through AO2, that is interpretation and application. The third point, it has also been used to coordinate protests and activism ranging from the promotion of animal rights to disrupting G8 meetings about climate change and debt in developing nations. So this particular paragraph that you saw over here, that this can help you understand these both points. The next point, the hacktivist network that I was talking about, for the ones who did not have clarity on this, if we speak about this group, let me just highlight this as well. There are many hacktivist groups that are there. Amongst these, one that has gained considerable popularity, the name of this hacktivist group is Anonymous. So what is Anonymous here? Anonymous is a decentralized international activist and hacktivist collective and movement primarily known for its various cyber attacks against several governments, government institutions, and government agencies, corporations, and also the Church of Scientology. So I've left you a hint. You can all Google this and you'd come across a lot that you'd find, I'm sure, very interesting. So talking about this anonymous group, remember when I had shown you how there was a question in 2021 and the question that we had in 2021 had anonymous written there, and at the same time I had told you how in 2022 there was a cyber attack against the Russian government. So this particular group, the anonymous, had a cyber attack on Russian government through which they hacked Russian government websites and were successful in leaking confidential documents related to the Ukraine war. I'm sure everyone sitting over here does have an idea about the Russia and Ukraine war. Taking this ahead, hacktivist networks such as Anonymous have defaced corporate and government websites and engaged in virtual sabotage such as web sit-ins and email bombing. What is email bombing over here? Sending so much information to a site that it crashes. And information theft, especially computer code theft. So there are multiple examples. You use an example you want to use. You use an example that you think would help you. Now, taking this ahead, if we take this ahead, I'd like to speak about Owen Spencer Thomas. This is the gentleman I'm referring to over here. He is the journalist. What about him now? He was born in 1940. He was born in England. He is perhaps best known as a television and radio news journalist over 3 decades. Now, let's have a look at what Owen Spencer Thomas has to say. Spencer Thomas uses the example of Burma, also known as Myanmar, to illustrate the growing influence of citizen journalists. I think I've explained what citizen journalism is at least twice. He notes that the mass anti-government demonstration in Burma. So let me just throw a spoiler over here. Over here, Mr. Spencer Thomas is trying to explain, he's trying to compare how there was a difference in terms of campaigning against the government, against the Burmese government, an initiative that took place in 1988. And back in when we talk about 1988, back then we only had traditional media, and so we're actually talking about a comparison. We're actually talking about a comparison between two different political campaigns against the Burmese government. So the first campaign that we spoke about against the Burmese government, like Spencer Thomas so the first campaign that we spoke about was in 1988, and the second campaign we talk about was in 2007. So talking about a comparison over here, remember back in 1988 there was traditional media, and in 2007 we had moved to new media or digital technology or internet and a lot more. So Spencer Thomas in 2008 uses the example of Burma to illustrate the growing influence of citizen journalists. He notes that the mass anti-government demonstrations in Burma in 1988 failed to receive much media attention because the military regime banned overseas journalists from the country. Imagine there is no imagine there's no new media, imagine there's no internet, right? When I talk about 1988, we're going around 37 years back, 37 years ago, when there was no internet. The Burmese government could have done whatever they wanted to do. They could have simply banned overseas journalists from the country. So if you're not allowing any international journalist to cover whatever you're doing in your country, whatever happens at home stays at home. And by contrast, so we're talking about a comparison between two campaigns, the first one being in 1988 and the second one in 2007. So moving on to the second one over here, by contrast, the mass demonstrations in 2007 received far more attention because civilians themselves had the technology. This is what citizen journalism is. For the fourth time now, the idea that a common man, the idea that a layman has an opportunity to do what a journalist does through the usage of smartphones, through the usage of camcorders, through the usage of internet and digital technology, you can send instant messages, you can send instant pictures to international media who's already waiting for news from your end. So today, a common man, a layman has this opportunity to contact international media networks like the BBC, like the Reuters, like the CNN. So in 2007 received far more attention because civilians themselves had the technology in the form of modern mobile phones and camcorders to send instant messages and pictures out of the country to waiting international media because the media needs news. Bring in words like news value, bring in words like media sensationalism, bring in words like gatekeepers, use words such as newsworthiness. Now, these, when you're writing words like these while you're writing your answer in the CI, you actually flaunting over your sociological vocabulary. Do that, trust me, it helps. So moving on, instant messages and pictures out of the country to waiting international media such as the Reuters, the BBC, and CNN. In other words, the digital revolution enabled citizen journalism. Now, quickly hop on to Twitter that is currently banned in Pakistan. This gentleman that we talk about right now is Mr. Dheeraj Murthy, just in case if you're interested. He is a researcher. This is how the gentleman looks like. Taking this ahead, Dheeraj Murthy in the year 2013 has empirically investigated what is evidence, what is empirical investigation. Empirical investigation is research based investigation. So, Mr. Murthy in the year 2013 has empirically investigated the impact of Twitter, formerly known as Twitter. These days, you refer to this as X, owned by Elon Musk. So Murthy has empirically investigated the impact of Twitter. Understand these keywords. I mean, this is not really a keyword, but I want you to not miss on this. So we're trying to pick on how Mr. Murthy was trying to investigate the impact of Twitter, which had 140 million users worldwide at that time. Now, we're talking about Twitter. We're talking about how Twitter had 140 million users globally back in 2013. This research that was conducted by Murthy was about investigating the impact of Twitter, who had 140 million users back in 2013, and he rejects the cultural pessimist view that Twitter represents the dumbing down of society. So, according to Twitter, according to Dheeraj Murthy, he rejects the cultural pessimist view. Understand, he rejects the pessimist view that Twitter represents the dumbing down of society, the victory of short attention spans, the death of meaningful communication, or the rise of what Keane calls me culture. Instead, Murthy claims that Twitter has proved extremely useful as a news gathering medium. So, back in 2013, Twitter had 140 million followers. Today, as of 2025, Twitter has 611 million monthly active users. And this is positioned as the 12th most popular social media platform worldwide. So, according to Dheeraj Murthy, he is showing his support towards Twitter. He believes Twitter has proved extremely useful as a news gathering medium in terms of communicating information about events. Now he tries giving us examples over here. These examples that you see on your screen, these are the examples that I refer to when I use AO2, when I talk about AO2. So, in terms of communicating information about events such as the Tohoku earthquake in Japan in 2011, just in case if you're not familiar, you might as well give this a read. In 2011, Tohoku earthquake and tsunami occurred at 2:46 Japan Standard Time on 11th March. The magnitude was between 9.0 to 9.1. Undersea megathrust earthquake had an epicenter in the Pacific Ocean, 72 kilometers east of the Oshika Peninsula of the Tohoku region, and lasted approximately 6 minutes, causing a tsunami. So, Mr. Dheeraj Murthy is trying to explain us how earthquake how earthquake, I'm sorry, how Twitter has been super useful in terms of helping people communicate, in terms of communicating information about events such as the Tohoku earthquake in Japan in 2011, and social movements such as Occupy movements, Occupy protests that we spoke about a couple of minutes ago, and the Arab Spring. Murthy argues that Twitter was particularly effective in the Egyptian protests that toppled President Hosni Mubarak. For the ones who do not know, President Hosni Mubarak, we have some information about him over here right now. Hosni Mubarak was the former president of Egypt. He died in 2020, and Hosni Mubarak was the president of Egypt from 1981 to 2011. Just count those years there: 1981, 1991, 2001, and 2011. So we're talking about Hosni Mubarak, the former president of Egypt, and the former president of Egypt, who was the president of Egypt for 30 years, good 30 years, 30. So Murthy argues that Twitter was particularly effective in the Egyptian protests that toppled President Mubarak, in two ways. First, Twitter helped enable a mass movement of people out onto the streets, right? So Twitter actually, according to Dheeraj Murthy, helped enable a mass movement of people out onto the streets. Just imagine for a bit, for someone who has governed or who's been the president for 30 years, imagine the immense amount of power that particular person would have. One, he's the president. Number two, he's been the president for 30 years, and that matters. So, according to Murthy, Twitter helped enable a mass movement of people out onto the streets protesting about high unemployment, persistent poverty, and police brutality. Indeed, Murthy notes that both the internet and Twitter were regarded by the Egyptian authorities as so threatening that their dissemination of activist information that they were shut down for a week by the government in January 2011. This is not something that you all are not familiar with. This is not something that you're all not familiar with in this day and age in 2025. You all are aware how the government very conveniently shuts down internet. So according to Murthy, the new media was powerful. It was powerful enough to be seen as a threat by the Egyptian government. It was powerful enough to be seen as a threat to the extent that both Twitter and internet, they were banned for a week by the government in January 2011. That's one way. Number two, second, Murthy argues that Twitter helped to bring international attention to what was going on by acting as a valuable news source for international journalists. So, one, the first way, according to Murthy, internet helps or the new media helped was by bringing people together. Number two, passing on this information to international media, letting international journalists know what was actually happening in Egypt. Murthy concludes that even if tweets did not bring feet to Egyptian streets, they helped to facilitate a diverse global network, a diverse global network of individuals who participated in a wide ranging set of mobilization efforts, from the retweeters in Starbucks to those sending letters to the Congress people, ministers, or participating in activist movements both online and offline. So according to Dheeraj Murthy, Twitter has been, which is of course an example of the new media, Twitter has been super helpful. Twitter has been super powerful too. He argued that although Twitter may not topple governments as a young communications medium, it has the potential to shape many aspects of people's social, political, and economic lives. So, if we talk about a conclusion from Dheeraj Murthy, he claims that Twitter may not be powerful enough to topple down a government, but it is still powerful enough powerful enough to be able to shape many aspects of an individual's social, political, and economic lives. Now, we're speaking about different examples. If I try recalling the examples that we've discussed in the last hour, I guess you could write down about, if I try recalling the examples that we've used, we've spoken about the Arab Spring, we've spoken about President Hosni Mubarak, we've spoken about uh uh we've spoken about the earthquake in Japan, we've spoken about how there was a change in Tunisia and how there was no change in many other countries. And we've spoken about hacktivist movements. We've spoken about the hacktivist group Anonymous. Now, a question that could be raised at this point is, do we write this as a point in support or against? See, I'll tell you, in sociology, if you can play with your words, if you're clear about what your intent is in terms of what you've written, this point could be used both sides. Remember, if you're writing down about the for side, yes, it was powerful enough. It was powerful enough that the government saw it as a threat. If the government wouldn't have seen it as a threat, the government wouldn't have shut down internet for a week. Now, flip side of the coin, is it powerful enough to bring in a change? Oh, yes, there was a change, but this change would be better referred to as a multi-causal change. Twitter could be a reason, like Twitter, like Murthy suggests, Twitter was a reason to mobilize people, to bring people together. Maybe like if you remember, if in the last few paragraphs it said Twitter, I don't exactly remember the line, I'll just show it to you. This says, where did it go? So where Murthy concludes that even if tweets did not bring feet to Egyptian streets, they helped to facilitate a diverse global network. So you could write it in support, you could write it against, and you could also write it in your conclusion too. Next, let's speak about another more recent example of a digital activism or digital activist campaign, that is the Me Too campaign, which seek to raise awareness of the widespread nature of the sexual abuse and harassment of girls and women by men. This is something that you would be familiar with if we talk about, okay, yeah, now this is a contemporary issue. When we talk about a contemporary issue, this is a recent issue. So the Me Too campaign continues to rock our world. It has spread across the globe and crossed racial, economic, and other boundaries. The digital campaign gained. Now, remember, we're using the word digital campaign over here. We're talking about digital activism. We're talking about this under the heading of digital optimism, right? See the different words I'm using. I've been using the term digital technology. I've been using the term digital optimism. I've been using the word digital uh, optimism, technology. digital activist now, and now I'm using the term digital campaign. So it has the digital campaign gained traction on October the 15th, 2017, when in response to allegations of sexual harassment against Hollywood film producer Harvey Weinstein, actress Alyssa Milano posted a tweet urging women who had been sexually assaulted or harassed to post a status on social media with the words "Me Too." To give people a sense of the magnitude of the problem, when she woke the next morning, she found that over 30,000 people had used Me Too. Now, we are talking about, remember, we had spoken about two different aspects. We had spoken about according to what is it again? According to Earl and Kimport in the year 2011, we had spoken about two main effects. We had spoken about the quantitative effect, which we had referred to as a scale change, and then we had spoken about a qualitative effect, which we had referred to as a model change. So remember, overnight there were, okay, so keeping that in mind, overnight we're talking about 30,000 people that you've communicated your message to. Besides hitting Hollywood, media, politics, national security, and other sectors, the movement has rapidly spread across the world. A mirror of the numerous women's marches across the globe this past January. By early November, Me Too had been tweeted 2.3 million times from 85 countries. However, the Me Too campaign has been somewhat less visible in the Arab world. According to the reporting from CNN, experts believe that the burden of harassment and abuse there is a rife as in any other region, but the voices heard are few and far between. Lina Aberafeh, director of the Institute for Women's Studies in the Arab World in Lebanon, suggests that there are so many reasons behind this silence. I have heard trickles, but people are scared, in part due to norms that attach stigma and shame to speaking out. So we have another example. See, there are so many examples that you can use. There are so many examples that you know of, probably I don't. So just know that you know enough about a particular event, a particular campaign to be able to write down a paragraph on it. Remember, do not forget sprinkling sociology. Do not forget using sociological vocabulary. Taking this ahead, let's quickly move on and discuss the limitations of digital optimist view. So having a look at the flip side of the coin, where people are, where digital optimism might not be as powerful as it appears to be. The evidence and arguments outlined above provide strong support for the claim that the digital revolution has empowered ordinary citizens and facilitated, if not promoted, political action against authoritarian governments and against powerful interests within democracies. However, this is only one side of the story. So to begin with, remember we had spoken about Occupy movements, how this Occupy movement started in New York, went reached really quick to around 900 cities worldwide. So taking this ahead, let me remind you real quick as I speak about this Occupy movement. We are talking about how there were demonstrations against social inequality and political domination of the richest 1%. The question that rises over here is, what difference have you been able to make to the richest 1%? Or have you even been able to make any difference at all? That's a question that leads to many answers. So, however, this is only one side of the story. As already stated, the Occupy protests in Wall Street spread to over 900 cities worldwide. Yet, Wall Street is still standing, and the interests of finance capitalism appear not to have suffered any major setbacks. So, this again could be used. This again could be used. This again is a limitation. This again is a limitation to the digital optimist view. Now, taking this ahead real quick from here, if we speak about the Arab Spring now, as we speak about the the Arab Spring led to protests and demonstrations across many countries in the Middle East and Northern Africa. Yet, as of 2018, only the uprising in Tunisia had resulted in a transition to constitutional democracy. Let me remind you, do you see how the very same words have been used in the marking scheme as well? And this is something that I've spoken about twice earlier, at least. In other countries, authoritarianism still prevails, as in Egypt, or civil wars continue, as in Syria. So, according to Thomas Carruthers in 2015, just in case if you're interested, he is Thomas Carruthers is a professor. He's an American lawyer and an expert on international democracy. Taking this ahead, as Thomas Carruthers in 2015 argues, the number of democracies today is basically no greater than it was at the start of the century. And many existing democracies today are experiencing serious constitutional debilities or weaknesses and weak public confidence. So, according to Carruthers, despite of the advancement in technology, if I talk about this in this particular context that we're referring to over here, despite these advancements in technology, the number of democracies today are basically no greater than it was at the start of the century. So, how many countries, how many societies, how many governments have changed from authoritarian regimes to democratic governments is a question. According to Carruthers, there are many according to Carruthers, the existing democracies that we have today, they're experiencing serious institutional weaknesses, and people feel very people they've stopped showing this support towards these democratic governments, or we could say these apparent democratic governments. How can this be explained? There are a number of factors that could lead to this. Number one, first, protests and demonstrations can usually be withstood by established authorities unless they succeed in engaging enormous numbers. So you need numbers if you're protesting. Rakesh Rajani, reflecting 6 years later on the limited successes of Tuawiza, a digital social change initiative in East Africa, which he launched in 2009, commented that technology does not drive anything. So, according to Rakesh Rajani, he reflected 6 years later on the limited success of the limited success on the limited success of Tuaweza. What is Tuaweza? It was a digital social change initiative in East Africa, which he launched in 2009. He commented that technology does not drive anything. It creates new possibilities for collecting and analyzing data, mashing ideas, and reaching people. But people still need to be moved. People still need to be moved to engage and find practical pathways to act. Where the fear of being beaten or the habits of self censorship inhibit agency, technology, however versatile, is a feeble match. Now, you want to use this example, you use this. I have a strong feeling many of you would not even be familiar to this. So it is okay. Even if you're not using this, there are ample of examples that we've already discussed. There are ample of examples that we've already spoken about that could be used by you. Now, taking this a little further from here, a little too quick, because I don't want lesson to be this lesson to take long as it took yesterday. Second, authoritarian governments increasingly seek to limit the liberating potential of the new communication technology. Authoritarian governments, they limit the liberating potential of new communication technology by means of censorship, mass political control, and technology capture, using the same technologies that have enabled the global information explosion to stifle internal dissent by monitoring and surveilling critical voices. Now, we have an example from Turkey over here. So you could speak about how some authoritarian governments, they deliberately limit the liberating potential of new communication technologies. So this example from Turkey in the year 2014. In 2014, the internet law requires internet service providers, that is ISPs, to store the data they collect on web users' activities for 2 years and to make it available to the authorities upon request. Now, what sort of journalist freedom do you have? What sort of freedom do you have as a citizen journalist when you're aware that the internet service provider whose services you're using has been compelled by the government, has been compelled by the legal system to store data for 2 years? At any given point, if you say something that goes against the government, And the government, if the government wants to investigate it, the government can use it against you. How safe would you feel? To what extent do you think new media now is powerful enough? So we have examples like this example that you have right in front of you, this example from Turkey from 2014. Now, it should be noted that similar laws have also been passed in democratic governments. I mean, why only blame authoritarian regimes? The book sees Turkey as an authoritarian regime, but there are several examples that we have from the more developed parts of the world as well. From a democracy, let's just say if we speak about the United Kingdom, the UK's Investigatory Power Act of 2016, despite opposition from civil rights group, however, the political context matters. According to Amnesty International in Turkey, since the failed coup of July 2016, over 281 journalists have been imprisoned. So the coup was a failure. The military coup was a failure. Nonetheless, there were 281 journalists who had been imprisoned in July 26 after July 2016. In other words, it is not only pro-democracy activists who can use digital technology, it is equally available to those who oppose democracy or wish to undermine democratic processes as well. For example, IS, also referred to as ISA, IS, also referred to as Daesh. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this. So we're talking about how this technology could be used by criminals, by groups that are a danger to the society. ISIS, for example, has made sophisticated use of digital technology to seek to radicalize young Muslims. Remember, radicalize or to brainwash young Muslims and recruit them in the name of jihad. According to anti-radicalization think tank, that is Quilliam in 2015, Quilliam is an anti-radicalization think tank. I don't want to comment on this any further. Google's there for you to figure out. According to the anti-radicalization think tank Quilliam in 2015, that is ISIS, produced a daily an average of 3 videos, more than 15 photographic reports, and 9 radio news bulletin in multiple languages, all available online. So, don't you think this could be enough to brainwash anyone? Multiple languages, don't miss on that point. In addition, ISIS makes extensive use of social media, including YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr in 2016 at least. Finally, Senem Duzit, just in case if you want to know who she is, she's an author, a Turkish author. Finally, as Senem Duzit argues, it is important not to lose sight of the fact that outside the wealthy established democracies, large number of people still seek access to digital technologies. Remember in the lesson yesterday, we had spoken about digital divides. Do you think every country has equal access to the internet, or people residing in the least developed countries, also referred to as LDCs, do you think they have access to the internet just as like individuals from a rich democracy has, just as people in a developed country have? No, they don't. So there, the term we had used yesterday, and I believe I had spent 25 minutes explaining the term digital divides. So large numbers of people still lack access to digital technologies. In Turkey, for example, approximately half of households still lack internet access. They're therefore reliant on government-controlled traditional media. A third hint over here. Look at how the words being used over here are the same words that have been used by the marking scheme. Let's conclude this real quick. My time is almost up. The time I had promised I'd end this lesson. So, as Mary Joyce in 2013 argues, the reality of digital activism is more complicated. Now, pick up content from here because remember, AO3 is worth 15 marks. It's more complicated, dear. It's more complicated than you think it is. According to Joyce in 2013, argues the reality of digital activism is more complicated than either cyber optimists or digital pessimists. Suggests digital So I think you understand what cyber optimists and digital pessimists over here is. I mean, you could say and digital optimists and digital pessimists too. Why confuse? Digital technology does not have uniquely positive or negative effects on activism. Much depend on the context, on the political system in which activists are operating, and on the complexity of the problem they seek to remedy. Even if you do not write this, you could say, oh, it is more complicated than it apparently appears to be like. However, as Martin Tyson argues, the focus on the impact of digital activism at the national level may be missing significant developments at the local level. So for the last hour or so, we're referring to how digital activism has an impact on national governments, on international governments too. Remember, we had spoken about anonymous hacking the Russian government. We should not ignore the effect it could have at a local level too, which are extending democracy. He cites the example of Fix My Street. This is a website and app that helps people in the United Kingdom inform the local authority of problems needing their attention, such as potholes, broken street lamps, and so on. Now, these are just examples. You want to use them, use them. You don't want to use them, that's totally okay. I don't see any harm in using them. This is such a simple example. Next, we have another example, Budget. This is a Nigerian Budget is a Nigerian civil organization that uses digital tools to simplify government budgets and public finance data. It helps citizens understand spending and promotes fiscal transparency to fight against corruption. So this another digital activist platform that we're referring to, this another Nigerian digital activist platform that we're referring to as Budget, holding local and regional officials to account on spending issues. So if I keep it simple, they're trying to control corruption. Next, Majora to Escuela, if that's how you call it. This is a Mexican online platform that provides information on the quality of schools, allowing parents and students to compare institutions and demand better education standards. The idea over here is to promote transparency and accountability in the education sector. As a book reads, this is a Mexican initiative which allows parents to track the performance of local schools. Now, let me quickly take you back to where we took a start from. This. So, this question that you had in October, November 2021, the question over here reads the new media as the new media, the question reads access to the new media has given people more power to challenge existing power structures. It's a 35 mark question. Just have a quick look at the marking scheme. All of what you see over here, I mean, to me, it looks like this as is being picked from our student book published by Collins, that is also referred to as the Purple Book. This is what we have spoken about in the last hour or so. So I hope this lesson has been helpful. When we talk about new media, like I had mentioned in the last lesson, I'd like to divide this into three different parts. The first part we did yesterday, the previous lesson. This is the second part that we did today. And now we move on towards the third part in the lesson we'd have tomorrow. Thank